As you've suggested, community members are obviously anxious for some action on this as they see this video on social media. Now, yours is a service, Halton Police, that I know a little bit. Just to be clear, I've done some charitable work, some community work with the force over the years, and I've seen the long and strong community ties. It's something that your force prides itself on in terms of its place in the community. So when you talk about the video eroding trust, what are your concerns about the consequences of this within the broader public?
You know, my concern, Heather, is if we look at last year, 2019, our officers responded to 157,000 calls for service. They've saved lives, they de-escalate situations involving dangerous or violent offenders or people suffering from mental health, mental illnesses or addictions. And they do that day in and day out with a minimal use of force. We surveyed our community here in Halton in 2019. And in categories relating to whether our officers are honest and fair, courteous and polite, they have a caring attitude, they're approachable, and they inspire confidence, those rating levels were all at 94 or 95%. So we know that we have the trust and faith of the public at large here in Halton. But what an incident like this does, or even an incident in a different country does, is brings the profession into question. And all the good work that is done by our 1,000+ members day in and day out is brought into question because of the actions of one officer at one given day and time.
But it's not just this one incident, though, Chief. I mean, to be fair, the timing of this at a time when criminal justice issues, anti-black racism, the whole actions of police officers everywhere is very much on the microscope, and there's been a lot of criticism and calls for reform. Look with me to solutions, if you would. I know you've talked about the Police Services Act, how you're constrained. You can only suspend with pay, and that's been a complaint of yours. We heard from the Premier yesterday, for example, saying he wants to speak with provincial chiefs like you, police associations, police boards, to look at ways to reform how you can discipline police officers. What do you think has to change?
Well, I think in the worst case scenario, and whatever that incident may be, there should be the option to suspend without pay, then go through the process, go through the hearing process. If an individual is found not to be guilty at that point, there certainly could be a return of salary dollars. That's the concern of the police associations. I understand that. If they had a tyrannical police leader or a tyrannical chief of police who was out to get someone and had the authority to suspend someone without pay, that would be a devastating thing to the individual and their family. So there has to be a balance of judicial process and the expediency of that process. Now, Heather, sometimes in Ontario, we have had situations in other services where an individual police officer has been suspended with pay for 7 years. I think the record might be around 10 years. Over $1 million of salary paid out, and then the officer may reach the point where he or she can retire from the service. And at that point, the Police Services Act no longer applies because they're not members of the service. So I think something needs to be done so that these processes are far more expedient, that we get to them quicker. And if someone needs to be terminated for employment purposes, that we have the processes in place that we can get to them quicker and justify what we're doing to protect those citizens' tax dollars and to protect the citizens.
Maybe one of the points of discussion if the Premier convenes something further. Can I ask you something to conclude? And I appreciate your time this morning, but there is such raw and profound criticism of policing and police conduct in Canada and in the world right now. You're a longtime officer. You joined that force in 1982 and came back to it as its chief. How are you feeling about this moment, and how are you processing it?
You know, I've always looked at the most negative situations in policing, no matter what country or province they happen in, and say that situation brings our performance of our duties as a profession into doubt for the public that we serve. We are here to serve the public. We get to serve the public. In my view, I have not worked a day in the last 37.5 years because I get to do what I do. And that's what I think the majority and the vast majority of our frontline police officers feel and believe. There's a bit of a mistrust, and some of it can be perpetuated in some ways by the media because of coverage of different situations. But some are so horrendous that I absolutely agree they need to be covered in the manner they are. Other professions have issues, Heather. I know of situations where doctors have been charged with criminal offenses, teachers have been charged with criminal offenses or sexual assault related types of offenses throughout Ontario over the years. That does not lead to, a sort of a calling for a defunding of the health system or a defunding of public education. We are very different because we are invested with great authority to protect the public, up to and including taking the life of an individual if it is to protect your own life or the life of another. But like no other profession, when an incident happens, which really is an individual acting poorly or extremely badly, the whole profession gets called into question. So that
Are you suggesting
where
that's unfair?
No, I'm not suggesting it's unfair because we need to be in a position of trust. I think my message is, though, that yes, situations happen. Human beings make terrible mistakes and commit incredibly horrific acts, even if they are police officers from time to time. I think the focus sometimes needs to be on the individual as opposed to the profession, because we do a tremendous amount here, as the statistics and the public trust sort of clearly indicate, and we train to de-escalate all the time. And then we still have these terrible situations happen, which need to be addressed, absolutely. But often it's the individual or a small group of individuals who have chosen to break the law or do something criminal or whatever the case may be. We need to hold them accountable. And we need to show the public that we are holding police officers to a higher standard, not just the same standard as a member of the public.
Chief, I appreciate, as I said, your time this morning and letting us know where things stand on this incident in your force. The head of the Halton Regional Police Service is Chief Stephen Tanner.